I am going to focus initially on humanitarian assistance, and I'm going to do it through the lens of what we have started, mental health and emotion, because I come to this topic as a sister who has worked with refugees and asylum seekers, to use that language, for more than 40 years as a practicing psychologist. And I want to tell you that there's been, in the area of humanitarian assistance, we have evolved our thinking about mental health in these 40 years. I'll start by saying that it has been a debate, a big debate in the past, and maybe it's best to use what we already talked about earlier today about the tragedy of Greece 2 weeks ago now. And most people would conceptualize or think that people who have been part of the relatives or the survivors would be people who would now find themselves traumatized. This is a strong language that we use, and in need of therapy and counselling. This is and has been the common concept of mental health, of us having people traumatized when they arrive in our country or on our borders, given the journey that they have experienced. And it's true, for a number, they have been overwhelmed. This is completely true. But what we now know from the World Health Organization and other experts is that people are impacted when on the move and in emergencies, but that over time, many recover. Over time, most are able to resume a life without this PTSD or trauma diagnosis. But sure, some will need specialist help. But we estimate now that that's maybe 10% of a population. It's not 100%. So we have been in debate, the mental health experts, about how to work with people fleeing conflict, disasters, arriving and being encamped or put into detention or into these leaky boats. How is the best way for us to provide humanitarian assistance from a mental health perspective? We have come to what we call a multi-layered framework, where the vast majority of people we now recognise need what I already heard Ahmed say today. They will need some psychological first aid, a bit like people need physical first aid. They will need case management to be referred to where there are resources. Some will need a little bit more, so we move up our framework to where unaccompanied minors, pregnant women, young boys who are without adults. So they will maybe need a little bit more of assistance. But as we move up the framework, we now think fewer and fewer need to have specialist attention. This framework has recently been agreed at the UN level, UNHCR, all of the major agencies that we represent now recognise this framework. Unfortunately, the narrative of people who have fled still is one of trauma. The popular narrative, which in the past we fear has characterised people as being in need It's reduced their skills, their capacity in our thinking, because we see them as pathologized, as in need of this extra medical assistance. So it continues to be, while we, the humanitarians, have come to some agreement how to have people understand it at the more popular level. But as Ahmed said to us very clearly, it's now recognised that we need to be with the people, but we can often provide enough assistance for them to assist themselves. The capacity of the people is very strong, but I do always want to say there will always be people overwhelmed. And the disaster of Greece is an overwhelming experience, so we expect there will be people overwhelmed. But again, time is important. The other debate in my field of humanitarian assistance and mental health is, do we have what we call standalone services? So a mental health agency that people go to, or a psychosocial agency, or do we integrate the thinking into water and sanitation, education, livelihood? In different parts of the world, this debate continues. What's the best way? I was recently in Mexico, and many people were telling me the stigma of mental health is such that families will never go to a standalone organisation. They will start often with church or community for support because of the stigma with their family. So the role that Sister Pat talked about earlier of culture is very significant for how we translate and roll out humanitarian assistance. I have been pondering where religious sisters are in mental health and psychosocial. Where are we? Earlier today, Julia spoke of us, and I thought, I almost don't recognise us as democratic and capable, and we are also flawed. So we come sometimes to emergencies and displacement with the sense of people are traumatised, or we don't know what's the agreed frameworks. And this role of education, I think, remains important so that sisters can also be consistent with international thinking, so that we can network with you with a common way of, or a common approach and an understanding of best practice. But I think we also bring a good practice, because often what sisters are is we are first responders, if I can say that. We are often there before the humanitarians come, or as Neves was saying, we stay when others go to the next crisis. So sisters are often consistently present, and we have a capacity to network. We also are bigger than we are, in the sense of we have resources that are not ours, but we can access. And by that I mean with community, neighbourhood, faith communities. I think that's something that we bring and we stay. We use language that's also, and Pope Francis uses the same language. We use language like accompaniment. I've heard that word already this morning here, where we don't necessarily call people clients. We often wonder what to call them, but we accompany. They are, and as again Sister Neves showed us, they become our friends on Facebook. I mean, I'm always warning people, don't do that, but they become our friends. We accompany them. We hear about their children and their grandchildren. We also use the term pastoral. We see it as more than just bringing them to health or emotional well-being or flourishing. we see them as whole people. These are skills, though, that are not necessarily natural. So I have heard the discussion about education, and our project that UISG is part of is also how to prepare us to be disaster ready, emergency ready. Us being the sisters, but also our partners. Because, as I said earlier, we're not always aware of the frameworks, and we sometimes hold the stories that are not kind of the ones that are most helpful in humanitarian assistance. I also think we need to focus a lot more now on not just training, but supervision. How do we keep consistent in working appropriately with the population we work with, and not getting ourselves burnt out or behaving inappropriately. So the role of supervision, which hasn't always been in our language. The UISG, Religious Sisters, we recognise our own frailty and diminishment, and we also recognise an uncertain world. And so more than ever, what we have as our mission is very important. Finally, our Catholic tradition teaches us that human dignity is important and to be protected, and that a healthy community is only healthy if people have their human rights. So we have a tradition that reinforces the rights approach. It's not foreign to us, it's part of our Catholic social teaching. So I think in summary, we struggle with some of the issues that we've been talking about, of us also turning away from the migrant, us also thinking inappropriately of their needs, but we have a foundation that kind of can help us to come back to being of some capacity, but it's becoming more and more apparent we need you. We cannot do this work by ourselves, but we can bring to humanitarian assistance a fidelity that is something that's not always fully seen in other organisations because of agencies having to pursue funding and moving on, etc. So we are a worthy partner, but also one that needs to be assisted to be a good partner. Thank you.